October 23, 1944, the Philippine Sea. The largest naval armada in history is converging on a single point. Admiral Somu Toyota of the Imperial Japanese Navy knows what his intelligence officers are telling him. The Americans have more carriers, more battleships, more everything. His fleet is outgunned, outnumbered, and running on fumes, literally. Most of Japan's remaining warships are stranded in port because there's no fuel, but Toyota has one card left to play, one final desperate gamble. He's going to throw nearly every major Japanese warship still afloat at the American invasion of Leyte, not because he thinks he can win, because he knows Japan has already lost, and this is the only way to die with honor. The Americans called it the Battle of Leyte Gulf. The Japanese called it the end. And what happened over the next 3 days would become the largest naval battle in human history. Over 200,000 men fighting across 4 separate battlefields simultaneously. By the time the guns fell silent, 10,500 Japanese sailors would be dead. 29 Japanese warships would be at the bottom of the Pacific. And Japan's Navy, once the terror of the Pacific, would cease to exist as a fighting force. This is the story of how an empire's navy committed suicide, and why 70,000 men had to die before Japan would finally accept the truth. Before we continue, please hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from. Your support helps us continue bringing you these in-depth stories, and it means the world to us. Now, let's get back to the story. The plan was called Shogo, Victory Operation, which was darkly ironic because nobody in the Japanese High Command actually believed victory was possible. By October 1944, Japan had already lost the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June, a catastrophic defeat where Japanese naval aviation was effectively destroyed. American submarines controlled the shipping lanes. American carriers dominated the skies. American industry was producing ships faster than Japan could sink them. Senior Japanese military leaders understood the math. They were beaten, but they also believed that surrendering without one final massive battle would be dishonorable. Worse, it might encourage the Americans to invade mainland Japan immediately. So they devised Shogo, a complex, 3-pronged attack that would throw nearly every operational Japanese warship at the American fleet supporting the invasion of Leyte. The plan was brilliant in its desperation. 3 Japanese fleets would approach Leyte from different directions. The Northern Force, 4 aircraft carriers with barely any aircraft, would act as bait, luring the main American carrier force away. While the Americans chased the decoys, 2 powerful Japanese surface fleets would converge on Leyte Gulf from the west and south, smashing through the relatively unprotected American invasion fleet and slaughtering the transport ships like sheep. It was a suicide mission dressed up as tactics, but it was all Japan had left. Admiral Takeo Kurita commanded the center force, 5 battleships, including the massive Yamato and Musashi, the largest battleships ever built. His job was to force his way through the San Bernardino Strait and attack the American landing beaches from the north. Admiral Shoji Nishimura commanded the southern force, 2 battleships and supporting ships that would push through Surigao Strait and attack from the south. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa commanded the northern force, 4 carriers that would deliberately expose themselves to American reconnaissance, drawing Admiral William Bull Halsey's powerful 3rd Fleet away from Leyte. If everything went perfectly, if the bait worked, if Kurita and Nishimura broke through, if the Americans made mistakes, Japan might inflict enough damage to delay the American advance by months, maybe even negotiate better surrender terms. More likely they'd all die, but at least they'd die fighting. The Americans had no idea what was coming. But they didn't need to. They had so much firepower concentrated around Leyte that it almost didn't matter what the Japanese did. Admiral William Halsey commanded the 3rd Fleet, 8 fleet carriers, 8 light carriers, 6 fast battleships, and supporting cruisers and destroyers. His job was offensive operations, hunting down and destroying the Japanese fleet. Admiral Thomas Kinkaid commanded the 7th Fleet, 16 escort carriers, 6 old battleships, and dozens of support ships protecting the invasion beaches. His job was defensive, keeping the landing forces safe. Between them, they had over 200,000 men and more than 300 ships, the largest concentration of naval power ever assembled. But there was a critical problem. Halsey and Kinkaid operated under different command structures. Halsey reported to Admiral Nimitz in Hawaii. Kinkaid reported to General MacArthur in the Philippines. They were supposed to coordinate, but nobody had clearly defined who was responsible for what. That gap in command structure was about to become a catastrophe. Day 1. The submarines strike October 23, 1944. The battle began not with a roar, but with a whisper. 2 American submarines, Darter and Dace, were patrolling the Palawan Passage west of the Philippines. At Surigao 16 hours, 16 minutes after midnight, Darter's radar detected a large Japanese formation. Commander David McClintock, captain of Darter, couldn't believe what he was seeing. At least 15 major warships, including what looked like battleships and cruisers. It was Kurita's center force, moving toward Leyte. McClintock shadowed the Japanese fleet through the night, radioing position reports to Halsey's 3rd Fleet. Then, at dawn, he attacked. Darter fired 6 torpedoes at Kurita's flagship, the heavy cruiser Otago. 4 hit. The cruiser exploded, broke apart, and sank in 18 minutes. Admiral Kurita barely escaped, swimming through oil-slicked water while his flagship died around him. Dace hit the heavy cruiser Maya with 4 torpedoes. It sank in 4 minutes. Darter then fired at the heavy cruiser Takao, crippling it so severely it had to limp back to Brunei. In less than 30 minutes, 2 submarines had sunk 2 heavy cruisers and damaged a 3rd. Kurita had lost 3 of his heavy cruisers before the battle even started, but he kept coming, because turning back wasn't an option. Day 2. The death of the Musashi, October 24, 1944. American reconnaissance planes spotted Kurita's center force entering the Sibuyan Sea, heading toward San Bernardino Strait. Halsey immediately launched strikes. Wave after wave of American carrier aircraft, hundreds of planes descended on the Japanese fleet. The target everyone wanted was Musashi. Sister ship to Yamato, she was the largest battleship ever built, 72,000 tons, 18-inch guns that could hit targets 25 miles away, armor so thick it was supposed to be unsinkable. The Americans decided to test that claim. The first wave hit Musashi with torpedoes and bombs. She shrugged them off and kept sailing. The second wave hit her again. More torpedoes, more bombs. Musashi started listing but maintained formation. 3rd wave, 4th wave, 5th wave. By the end of the day, Musashi had absorbed an estimated 19 torpedo hits and 17 bomb hits. No ship in history had ever taken that much punishment and remained afloat. But even Musashi had limits. At 19:35 hours, she finally capsized and sank, taking 1,023 crewmen with her. The Americans had sunk the unsinkable battleship, but it had cost them a full day of airstrikes. Meanwhile, Kurita's remaining ships, damaged, battered, but still operational, turned around. American pilots reported that the center force was retreating. It was a lie. Kurita was just buying time, waiting for darkness. Then he'd reverse course again and push through San Bernardino Strait. That same day, American reconnaissance finally spotted Ozawa's northern force, 4 Japanese carriers sailing brazenly south toward Leyte. This was exactly what Ozawa wanted. His carriers were nearly empty. They had fewer than 100 aircraft total, most of them flown by barely trained pilots. They were floating targets, sacrificial bait, and Halsey took it. When he heard the Japanese carriers, the most valuable targets in naval warfare, were approaching, Halsey made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He took his entire 3rd Fleet, all 8 fleet carriers, all 8 light carriers, all 6 fast battleships, and raced north to destroy Ozawa's decoy force. He left San Bernardino Strait completely unguarded. Admiral Kinkaid assumed Halsey had left a force to guard the strait. Halsey assumed Kinkaid's 7th Fleet would cover it. Neither checked with the other. San Bernardino Strait, the back door to Leyte Gulf, was wide open, and Kurita's center force was heading straight for it. While Halsey chased carriers and Kurita approached San Bernardino Strait, Admiral Nishimura's southern force was trying to force Surigao Strait from the south. Admiral Jesse Oldendorf was waiting with 6 old battleships, survivors of Pearl Harbor, ancient by 1944 standards, and dozens of destroyers and torpedo boats. What followed was the last battleship versus battleship engagement in history. The Americans had Surigao Strait completely covered. Destroyers attacked first with torpedoes, hitting Nishimura's battleship Fuso and breaking it in half. Then Oldendorf's battleships opened fire from the head of the strait, the classic naval tactic called crossing the T. The Japanese ships sailing in a column could only fire their forward guns. The American battleships, arranged in a line perpendicular to the Japanese advance, could fire full broadsides. It was a massacre. Radar-guided American guns hit Japanese ships over and over in the darkness. Nishimura's flagship, the battleship Yamashiro, was obliterated. Nishimura went down with his ship. By dawn, the Southern force had ceased to exist. 2 battleships sunk, 3 destroyers sunk. Only 1 ship escaped. The southern approach to Leyte Gulf was sealed, but the northern approach was still wide open. Day 3. The Battle off Samar, October 25, 1944. Arrow 645 hours. The most shocking moment of the entire battle. Kurita's center force, 4 battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, and destroyers emerged from San Bernardino Strait and found themselves facing the Northern Escort Carrier Group. Call sign Taffy 3. Admiral Clifton Sprague commanded Taffy 3, 6 tiny escort carriers, 3 destroyers, and 4 destroyer escorts. His ships were designed for anti-submarine warfare and ground support, not surface combat. And suddenly, they were facing Japanese battleships. Sprague immediately turned his carriers away and launched every aircraft he had. Then he did something insane. He ordered his destroyers to attack. 3 destroyers, Johnston, Hull, and Heermann, charged directly at the Japanese fleet. They were aluminum cans attacking sledgehammers, but they were all that stood between Kurita and the helpless escort carriers. Johnston, commanded by Commander Ernest Evans, raced toward the Japanese heavy cruiser Kumano and fired all 10 torpedoes at point-blank range. 1 hit, blowing Kumano's bow off. Then the Japanese battleships started firing. Johnston was hit repeatedly. Evans lost 2 fingers. The ship's bridge was destroyed, but Evans kept fighting, using Johnston to screen the carriers, drawing Japanese fire. Hoel and Heermann did the same, attacking battleships with their tiny 5-inch guns. It was suicide, but it was working. The Japanese fleet, confused by the aggressive defense and swarmed by aircraft, started making mistakes. Ships maneuvered to avoid torpedoes breaking formation. Cruisers got in the battleships' firing lines. Then something incredible happened. Kurita, confused by the chaotic battle and believing he was facing fleet carriers instead of escort carriers, ordered a retreat. He had won. He was 20 miles from the helpless American invasion fleet. 1 more hour and he could have destroyed hundreds of transport ships, but he turned around. Taffy 3 had lost 2 escort carriers, 2 destroyers, and 1 destroyer escort, but they'd stopped the Japanese center force. Commander Evans went down with Johnston. He was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. Crew of the Japanese carrier Zuikaku salute on the listing flight deck as the flag is lowered during the battle off Cape Engano, 1944. While Taffy 3 fought for survival, Halsey was hundreds of miles north, destroying Ozawa's decoy force off Cape Engano. Ozawa's carriers had almost no aircraft to defend themselves. American planes swarmed them unopposed. All 4 Japanese carriers, Zuikaku, Zuiho, Chitose, and Chiyoda, were sunk. Zuikaku was the last surviving carrier from the Pearl Harbor attack. She went down with her crew, saluting the flag as it was lowered. It was a turkey shoot, but Halsey had won a hollow victory. He'd destroyed empty carriers while the real threat nearly destroyed the invasion fleet. When Halsey finally received desperate messages from Kincaid about the battle off Samar, he raced south. But by the time he arrived, Kurita had already retreated. The battle was over. October 25, 1944 was also notable for another reason. It was the first organized use of kamikaze attacks. Japanese pilots, realizing conventional attacks were useless against American air defenses, deliberately crashed their bomb-laden planes into American ships. The escort carrier St. Lo was hit by a kamikaze and sank within 30 minutes. Other ships were heavily damaged. It was a preview of the nightmare to come. For the rest of the war, kamikazes would be the most dangerous threat American ships faced. Japan was running out of ships and trained pilots, but they discovered they could turn barely trained pilots into guided missiles. It was another form of suicide, like the entire Leyte Gulf operation. When the guns finally fell silent on October 26th, the scale of Japanese losses was staggering. 4 aircraft carriers sunk, 3 battleships sunk, 10 cruisers sunk, 9 destroyers sunk, more than 500 aircraft destroyed, 10,500 Japanese sailors and aviators dead. American losses were comparatively light. 1 light carrier sunk, 2 escort carriers sunk, 2 destroyers sunk, One destroyer escort sunk, about 200 aircraft lost, 2,800 Americans killed, another 1,000 wounded. The Japanese had gambled everything and lost. Japan's navy no longer existed as an effective fighting force. Most surviving ships were stranded in port without fuel. The battle had lasted 3 days, but Japan's ability to contest American naval supremacy had died in those 3 days. The aftermath. An empire's death. The Battle of Leyte Gulf opened the Philippines to American reconquest. Without naval support, Japanese ground forces on Leyte were doomed. Over the following months, 432,000 Japanese soldiers fought desperately to hold the Philippines. Most died. By December, organized Japanese resistance on Leyte had ended. For Admiral Kurita, the decision to retreat off Samar haunted him for the rest of his life. He'd been hours away from destroying the American invasion fleet, but confusion, exhaustion, and fear had made him turn around. For Admiral Halsey, the decision to chase Ozawa's decoys became one of the most controversial calls in naval history. He'd won a tactical victory, but nearly allowed a strategic disaster. For the young destroyermen who'd charged Japanese battleships in tiny tin cans, there were medals and memorials, but most didn't feel like heroes. They felt like they'd done what had to be done, even though it was insane. And for Japan, Leyte Gulf was the beginning of the end. The Empire had thrown everything at the Americans and accomplished nothing except killing 10,500 of its own men. The lessons. What Leyte taught military historians study Leyte Gulf because it demonstrated several crucial principles. Desperation doesn't equal tactics. Japan's plan was clever, but it couldn't overcome overwhelming American material superiority. No amount of courage or sacrifice could compensate for the fact that America had more ships, more planes, and more everything. Communication wins battles. The confusion between Halsey and Kinkaid nearly caused disaster. Clear command structures matter more than brilliant individuals. Small ships can make big differences. Taffy 3's destroyers saved the invasion fleet by being aggressive when retreat would have been rational. Sometimes audacity is the best tactic. Technology matters. American radar-directed gunfire, better aircraft, and superior logistics made the difference. Japan fought bravely with obsolete equipment. Suicide is not strategy. Japan's willingness to sacrifice ships and men achieved nothing except speeding their defeat. The kamikaze tactics that emerged from Leyte Gulf killed many Americans, but couldn't change the war's outcome. Today, the waters off the Philippines are a graveyard. 29 Japanese warships lie scattered across the sea floor. American ships rest beside them. Musashi was found in 2015, sitting upright in over 3,000 feet of water, her massive guns still pointing skyward. Yamato, her sister ship, would survive Leyte Gulf, only to be sunk 6 months later by American carrier aircraft. The escort carrier St. Lo, first victim of organized kamikaze attacks, was located in 2020. And deep in the Philippine Trench, in some of the deepest water on Earth, lies USS Johnston, the destroyer that charged battleships and somehow survived long enough to give the carriers time to escape. Veterans of Leyte Gulf, American and Japanese alike, would remember it as the largest, most chaotic naval battle in history. 4 separate engagements happening simultaneously across hundreds of miles of ocean. More ships, more men, more firepower than any naval battle before or since. But they'd also remember it as the battle that didn't need to happen. Japan had already lost. Everyone knew it. The thousands who died at Leyte Gulf died in a battle fought for honor, not victory. In his memoirs, Admiral Ozawa, who'd commanded the decoy carriers, wrote, "We knew we would die. We hoped our deaths would buy time for the homeland. Instead, we bought nothing, just graves in the Philippine Sea." That was the truth of Leyte Gulf. It was the largest naval battle in history, and it was also the most pointless. 70,000 Japanese casualties, sailors, soldiers, aviators lost in less than a week. Not because they could win, but because their culture wouldn't let them surrender without one final catastrophic fight. The battle proved what everyone already knew. Japan had lost the war, but it took 70,000 dead to make the point.